September 1944. It has been a few short months since the landings at Normandy, but the landscape of Europe has changed beyond recognition in that time. Soviet forces streamed through Poland and Romania after a number of great victories in the summer, and eye up further offensives through Hungary, eastern Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria. On the Western Front, France and Belgium have been all but liberated, and scattered German troops struggle to contain British and American forces. Nevertheless, far more German troops have managed to escape encirclement in the west than perhaps should have. Now there is a real risk that German forces might reform and dig in along the natural barrier of the Rhine River. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery believes he has a plan to pierce this defensive barrier before German forces even know what's happening, and throw open the gate to the British Second Army. With the most ambitious air assault ever attempted, could the Western Allies be about to end the war in 1944? In the late summer of 1944, the Allied command faced a critical question of how to exploit the collapse of German defensive in France. Two competing concepts begin to emerge. General Eisenhower, as Supreme Commander, favours a broad front advance, which would mean pushing forward along the entire line from the Channel coast to the Swiss border, keeping continuous pressure on German forces and ensuring supply lines remain flexible. This reflects both his desire for coalition balance, giving American, British and Canadian armies active roles, and his caution that Germany might recover strength if one concentrated thrust became overextended. In contrast, Field Marshal Montgomery and General Patton argue for a narrow front advance, concentrating the Allies' best forces in a small corridor of attack with a rapid advance towards key strategic targets. Montgomery proposes a single concentrated thrust north into the Netherlands and the German industrial base within the Ruhr Valley. This approach would require concentrating scarce resources, especially fuel and airborne assets, at the expense of other Allied armies. Nevertheless, Monty believes a thrust like this would provide the fastest and most decisive results. Operation Market Garden was to be the embodiment of the narrow front idea. By seizing a corridor through the Netherlands and crossing the Rhine at Arnhem, Montgomery hopes to bypass the Siegfried Line and open up a direct road to the Ruhr. The operation was presented as an opportunity to shorten the war dramatically. Montgomery's planning papers emphasize a breakthrough into Germany, rapid seizure of Germany's floundering war economy, and a wave of momentum that might carry the Western Allies all the way to Berlin in 1944. Allied supply in a general sense is in jeopardy at this time, and many units are facing critical shortages of fuel and equipment stocks. The rapid advance of the Allies throughout the summer has stretched their supply lines and outpaced the evolution of their supply model. Their original landing area near Cherbourg is still the primary insertion point for supply deliveries. Other ports further up the coast, most recently Antwerp, have been seized but are not yet workable. French resistance fighters, anticipating a more protracted war in France, have also blown a number of railroads that would now be invaluable in supporting the Allied advance. This makes the idea of Market Garden a rather expensive one. Failure, far from expediting Allied progress, could materially delay it, expending their meagre workable resources in one gamble, and then be forced to sit and wait for supply to catch up. A huge victory for the Soviet Union in Operation Bagration, and the destruction of the Wehrmacht's Army Group Center earlier this year, would seem to further pressure the Western Allies into acting. While there is no direct mention of a rush for Berlin in competition with the Soviets at this time, the desire to deliver the killing blow to the Third Reich personally, before the Soviets or the Americans have a chance to, is very real for Montgomery and the British. Partly, this comes from a feeling of being Germany's nemesis, the nation which has been at war with Germany the longest of the major Allied powers. To Monty and others, it seems right and proper that British forces should be the one to hammer the final nail into Hitler's coffin. There is also a growing feeling of unease within British ranks, however, at having gone from taking the lead in Africa and Italy to a mostly equal partner at Normandy, to increasingly becoming a minority in an ever more American-led and supplied army. Market Garden may be a way, in the minds of the British High Command, to re-establish themselves at the forefront of the fighting. The planning phase ultimately lasts just over a week. The idea first takes shape in early September 1944, with a precursor plan, Operation Comet, workable by September 7th. The plan evolves into Market Garden and is greenlit the 10th, scheduled to go off on the 17th. Compared to other major operations, this is an unusually short planning time, which means less time to refine details, coordinate logistics, and rehearse with the airborne divisions. Nevertheless, planners remain hopeful that German resistance will be light enough to account for this. The plan divides into two parts. Market, the airborne component, will aim to secure a corridor through the Netherlands. The US 101st Airborne Division under Major General Maxwell Taylor will drop around Eindhoven, capturing bridges over the Wilhelmina Canal and the Dommelen Aar rivers. The US 82nd Airborne Division under Brigadier General James Gavin will land further north around Carve and Nijmegen, tasked with capturing the Maas Bridge at Carve, holding the Groesbeek Heights, and eventually capturing the vital Waal Bridge at Nijmegen. Furthest north, the British 1st Airborne Division, commanded by Major General Robert Urquhart, and reinforced by Major General Stanislav Sosabowski's Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, will land west of Arnhem. Their task is to seize and hold the Lower Rhine Bridge, the final and most critical link. Their fighting will likely be the heaviest, and their position the hardest to supply. Garden, the ground offensive, is to be carried out by Lieutenant General Horrocks' 30 Corps of the British Second Army. Its spearhead, the Guards Armoured Division, with additional infantry and supporting units following behind. 30 Corps will drive north along a single main highway from the Belgian border, linking successively with each airborne division. The scale of the proposed airlift is unprecedented, with over 5,000 planes of both combat and transport varieties, and 2,500 gliders earmarked for the operation. Even so, this is still far below what is required for such an ambitious operation, and the forces involved are simply too large to be deployed in one wave. Thus, a main force shall arrive on the day of the operation, with reinforcements being delivered in subsequent waves. At Arnhem in particular, the most difficult location to assault from the air, this will force staggered landings over 3 days, limited the 1st Airborne strength at the outset. The weather will need to remain pleasant, as any delays due to storms or fog could throw a wrench into the operation's timetable and leave some units in the lurch, waiting for support. At this time, occupied Netherlands is defended by a patchwork of German formations. General Kurt Student's 1st Parachute Army consists mostly of broken and ill-equipped units being hastily reformed into something resembling a combat force. Student is given command of this army on September 4th following a phone call with Operations Chief Alfred Jodl, who orders him and his men to set up a line of defense on the Albert Canal and hold it to the death. Student understands his new rank as what he calls a rather high-sounding title for a force that doesn't exist. His perception is accurate. Forces assigned to the 1st Parachute Army exist all over Germany, without their own transport equipment and often without training. As D-Day for Market Garden dawns, the bulk of this army is still a mess of underprepared and under-equipped units dotting the front line, infantry training units, Luftwaffe ground personnel, and remnants of shattered divisions. The main force in the Arnhem area proper is the 2nd SS Panzer Corps under Wilhelm Bittrich, recently refitting after heavy fighting in Normandy. Its divisions, the 9th SS Panzer Hohenstaufen and 10th SS Panzer Division Frundsburg, are under strength, with much of their armour sent east, yet still retaining veteran troops, artillery, and some tanks. These SS troops are not directly subordinate to Student's 1st Parachute Army, but both forces fall under Walter Model's Army Group B and are expected to coordinate together in the defence of the region. Decryption from British intelligence and Dutch resistance reports had indicated a heavy German presence including armour in the Arnhem area, but this was discounted during planning. The expectation was that opposition would be quite limited. The airborne divisions were told to expect light resistance, with British paratroopers being told their main opposition would come from Hitler Youth and old men on bicycles. German intelligence anticipated a large airborne operation in September, potentially as a precursor to another naval landing, but remain unable to discern the precise targets before Market Garden gets underway. Eindhoven and Nijmegen offer open drop zones close to objectives, with flat fields suitable for parachute and glider landings. At Eindhoven, the 101st Division intends to land the bulk of its forces barely 2.5 kilometers from Zon, with one regiment landing elsewhere, just northwest of Wegel. At Nijmegen, the 82nd will land in the Groesbeek area, with one company landing 800 meters west of the Carve Bridge, which crosses the River Maas. Arnhem poses greater challenges. The chosen landing zones lay several kilometers west of the town, on heathland near Oosterbeek. This is necessary because the terrain closer to Arnhem, river flats, urban sprawl, and marshy ground, is regarded as unsuitable for mass landings. However, the distance will leave the British paratroopers with a long approach march to the Rhine Bridge, reducing their chance of capturing it quickly, Not only will the British 1st Airborne Division be the hardest to deploy and supply, but their task will inevitably be the most difficult. Forests to the west of Arnhem should at least provide some cover from AA fire for gliders and paradrops of the initial wave, and potentially slow the German response. To airlift such a colossal force in numbers capable of holding their ground, massive numbers of aircraft are being thrown into this first wave. Over 1,500 transport planes are made ready, primarily American C-47s, especially for paradrop duty, but also a mix of British Sterlings and Halifaxes for glider towing in the Arnhem sector. The most common model of the 478 gliders being deployed in this first wave will be the British Horsa, transporting British glider-borne troops and also being used in some circumstances by the Americans. The smaller American-made Waco glider will also be used extensively in the Nijmegen and Eindhoven sectors. The large and bulky British Hamilcar gliders will follow behind, bearing supplies and ammunition for the landed troops. The road through which 30 Corps must advance is equally precarious, with long raised segments sitting above marshy polderland which flanks both sides, forcing tanks to advance single file and without cover in some areas, making them easy prey for properly prepared anti-tank guns. In theory, ambushes like these could fire on the column with impunity and bring progress to a standstill, while British troops are forced to dismount their vehicles and wade through marshlands to clear the German positions out. All phases of the plan must go off like clockwork for there to be any chance of success, and that may be a tall order with so many potential hiccups. As the sun sets on Europe September 16th, an uncharacteristically impulsive Monty looks forward to what he hopes will be his greatest achievement. His many battles, all fought meticulously, bordering on scientifically, have brought him to this moment. Now he throws his methodical nature to the wind in pursuit of this career-defining masterstroke. Barely 100 kilometers of road stand between his forces and glory. But will that road be a highway to heaven or to hell? Find out next time, map by map, on Time Goes Cartographic. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to see more, then join the Time Goes Army at patreon.com/timegoeshistory or directly at timegoes.tv. It is the Time Goes Army that funds all of our projects and allows us to bring delicious, juicy map-related content to you. We'll see you in part 2 as Market Garden gets underway. Rest well, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'm not an AI. Farewell for now.